but they dote and swoon and fawn on a lady who's withdrawn. It's she who holds her tongue who gets a man. So with this, um, stop sharing. Yeah. So with this, Ursula's trying to deceive Ariel, who's 16. She doesn't know anything about other cultures, maybe even her own culture in under the sea with Atlantica. She's like Ursula is kind of duping her as like this older figure. Like I know how things are up there, so you don't really need your voice. You probably don't want your voice. You don't want to scare him away with your idle blabber and stuff like that. And so people are thinking this is problematic text because it's like, well, Ursula's saying women can't speak out and speak up and be outspoken and opinionated and what's wrong with babbling and what's wrong with idle gossip and stuff like that. Like women can have their voice. It's like, okay. First of all, let's say Ursula said the most offensive thing. Let's say she said a very nasty thing. Let's say she said something wrong and uncouth and offensive and you're indignant by that. It's like you probably should be indignant by that because why? She's a villain. She's a villain. So even if the text is offensive, even though if the text is problematic, who's speaking it? It's not a preacher. It's a witch. It doesn't make sense that people are offended by whatever the villain says. Like, you kind of want the villain to say like uncouth and offensive things anyway. It's like because they're the villain. So, I mean, now Ursula has her motives for saying what she said, even if she doesn't agree. Maybe she's opinionated as a figure. Maybe she would prefer women to be outspoken and loud and brash and stuff like that because women need to have their voices. Sure, but like her sole motive there for saying as much is to convince Ariel to give her her payment, which is her voice. It's not like Ursula said something bad for saying something bad, like for the sake of saying something bad, which she probably could do anyway because she's a villain. But it's like it's so funny how people have a problem with this problematic text spoken by the villain. The whole line between hero and villain these days in contemporary fashion is pretty funny because it's like we can't have villains say nasty things. What? Like villains should say odious things. They're villains. You should give the villain character a wide berth because you don't like what they're saying. The other thing too is like, what she's saying isn't entirely wrong and entirely untrue anyway, because we've all had friends or we've all had relatives who in a social setting, how like some people talk a little too high or a little too fast or a little too loud and it kind of cuts through the social setting, like you're in a restaurant or whatever and you kind of wish like one of your friends would kind of like just tone it down and stuff like that, be they female or male, it doesn't really matter. It's not really wrong that Ursula says that men might be more attracted to the withdrawn mysterious girl instead of the social, the girl seeking the attention and all the limelight and stuff like that, or being the social gossip. I mean, first of all, I mean, maybe men like a huge gossip, but it's not that becoming of a woman. So like the text itself is not problematic because it's just dealing with social things like social cues, what people might prefer. But even so, even if Ursula said the worst thing about women and young girls, that would be perfectly fine in the story because villains need to be odious. They need to be bad. They need to say bad things. They need to say things that you don't like. They need to say things that will get you rooting for the hero even more. She's that like insidious character that gives you the quick fix, to solve your problems, but there's a price to pay. And actually, there's this animation in the song where there's this really skinny merman who can't get the woman and this really fat, depressed female mermaid. And then she, with her magic, makes the man strong and the woman thin, and they fall in love and they're together. and it's implied that they didn't pay the price at the end of a certain time, at the end of a certain duration, and they became this kind of like seaweed creature, like part of her garden of unfortunate souls. It's very terrifying. It's like, don't make a deal with the devil, so to speak. Like she's an insidious creature. So she has every right as a character to say the worst, most abominable things. And but no, no, she said something insensitive. How dare this villainess say something so insensitive? It's like, you guys don't think things through. That's how stories work. You're supposed to dislike the villain. Can you imagine if like you make everything so polite with Ursula, like, oh, she's likable. It's like, no, she's supposed to be hideous and unlikable. And I mean, it's kind of like with the character, the bad guy of Dune, Baron von Harkonnen. He's supposed to be hideous and he's supposed to be a pedophile. You're supposed to loathe this man as the villain, you know. But the idea of making your villains absolutely loathsome, like Ursula's supposed to be loathsome. Can you imagine if they made her really attractive? As a girl, I probably would have want to see that more because I don't like seeing kind of how ugly Ursula is. But that's the whole point. She's supposed to be a loathsome creature. So she has every right to say loathsome things.